There's just one thing that I've been very curious about. Um a lot of times I have clients who ask me this question that I don't know how to build boundaries. It's like a very common theme of questions that I've noticed. Um, and before that happens, they also don't know that the boundary is being violated until it's too late. So I want to maybe understand that what is the point of us knowing that, okay, something is not okay. This is one question that I'm sitting with. I want to know your view on this. That is there a way to recognize that my space is being invaded or my boundary is being crossed? Yeah.
So what happens when our boundary is crossed is we feel that discomfort. Yeah.
Hmm.
And it is
Hmm.
what we do with that discomfort that matters. Do we tend to ignore it, or do we adapt to other people, or do we let that happen? Yeah. Or do we take a assertive action on it? So first thing about knowing that my boundary is being violated is to learn to sense that discomfort.
Oh. I'm imagining that while you're saying this, you mentioned a few things that what do we do with that discomfort? I'm imagining that there is a systemic issue where this discomfort is suppressed because if there are so many people out there who don't understand that their boundaries are being like violated, so I'm thinking that why why is it the case? Like what is happening at and at what point this is just becoming like it's okay if somebody is crossing my boundary. And only when it is too much for my system to take, that's when I make an action or make some change about it. So yeah, that is just a point of curiosity for me that what are we doing and why are we doing that with that discomfort rather than holding our discomfort.
So what happens is when we grow up, yeah, when we
Yeah.
grow up in our houses of origin, what happens there is that uh, there is no understanding of the boundary by the parents or by the children, and there is constant encroachment into the boundary. Yeah. So
Mm.
for generations, and if you take a culture also, a group of people also, this boundary violation has been happening. And why it has been happening? It's like a rule of belonging. Yeah.
Mm.
Only if I am allowed to take this freedom with you, then you are welcome here. So a child, when they
Mm.
grow up, they
Yeah.
naturally have a sense of boundary, but since it is repeatedly violated, it
Mm.
becomes like a norm or their normal way of relating. Yeah. So they lose the ability to realize their own boundary being violated, and they lose
Mm.
the ability to understand when they are violating someone's boundary.
Ah, this is interesting that it's not just that there is a loss of the sense or suppression of the sense of my boundary being violated, but it's almost like that boundary is now like I also don't know how much is okay, how much is not okay. Yeah, I experienced this that I've sensed that with a lot of clients who have those troubles of like boundary troubles, they also tend to break boundaries with me. And that discomfort, I also sense that discomfort, and a lot of times I'm able to make a assertive move and say that this is not okay. But a lot of times I also feel a lot of discomfort. So I'm just also wondering that there is some part of me that also feels suppressed or desensitized to this violation of boundary. That even though I have a sense of it, I'm letting go of it. Hmm. Uh, is it is it okay if boundaries are being violated? That's just a fun question that's coming to me. That is it okay that at some points people cross your boundaries or violate your boundaries?
So the definition of boundary itself is what you're okay in a relationship and what you're not okay in the relationship. Yeah. And sometimes the thing is, we learn to be okay with something externally, but internally we are not okay with it. Yeah. So there is a say that someone is disrespecting you by cracking a joke on you, a derogatory joke on you. Yeah.
Mm,
Internally you may feel bad,
mm,
but externally you may just laugh it off. Yeah. And
mm,
see that disrespect to happen. So there is
mm.
now a incongruence internally and externally. There's an incongruence. Yeah.
That's the way to know that this is not okay. Space of something like it's almost like if I am okay internally, then there's no crossing of boundary that has happened because that still feels okay, whatever that is. It might be different for somebody else and might be different for me. That what is okay, what is not okay. But
Yeah.
it's the incongruence that I experience is what tells me what is okay in my system. It's I'm imagining it's individually different what kind of boundaries people have, right?
Is individually also different and with the same person with different people also are different. You'll be okay with one person doing something, but not another person doing the same thing.
Ah.
Yeah. So it is a function of the relationship. Boundary is the line in the relationship that we allow or do not allow each other to cross.
Hmm. And the line, I'm just thinking out loud that is that line like a line of safety to protect me?
Like you can call it a line of safety, line of comfort.
Line of comfort.
Yeah.
Ah,
So what am
interesting.
I okay with? So a
Hmm.
relationship has certain definition, right?
Hmm.
In this kind of a relationship, I am okay with this much of freedom you take.
Hmm. 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 Okay. Like while you are here, I'm also sensing that you're like there are differential relationships will have differential lengths that are okay, that are not okay. But let's say that in some cases I'm okay, and in some cases I'm not okay. But I don't know how to say that because it's almost like I feel okay here. Why do I not feel okay here? So, how do I set boundaries in the XYZ context with where I'm not okay? Because I feel that there is a fear element to setting boundaries. Uh, and that fear is coming while I'm saying it, I'm sensing there's a fear of rejection. Like I will if I set this boundary, they will feel hurt and they will not want to like continue the relationship with me. So I'm wondering, is there a way to communicate and set boundaries with XYZ person you feel not okay with?
So why we hesitate to set boundary, even if we are in discomfort, is because there is a fear about the relationship. Yeah, like you said, the fear can be about rejection also, but primarily we can categorize it as fear of loss of relationship.
Hmm.
Yeah. So if I say what I want, I may lose
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
yeah.
That is the fear. So the thing there is to first understand for oneself, why do I want this boundary in this relationship? And be convinced that this relationship is healthier with that boundary. Yeah. That is the first step. For one to have the conviction that I want this boundary. This
Hmm.
relationship is
Hmm.
much better with that boundary. Yeah.
Hmm.
Secondly, find a uh, respectful way to communicate that. Yeah. To
Yeah.
communicate how you feel when someone does something
Hmm.
and what would you like instead. Yeah. If
Mm.
you take ownership of your own process, your own feelings in a respectful manner to the other person, and tell them that when you do this, when you make jokes on me in front of these people,
Mm.
I don't feel very good about it.
Mm.
Would you be okay in being sensitive about this in the future?
Mm.
Yeah. And hence, there's no implication of rejecting the person. We are just
Yeah.
asking for a behavioral correction. How we are teaching them how to relate with us. What will be comfortable for me
Mm.
when you relate with me?
Mm. Yeah. I see it's not canceling the person, it's bringing to attention what is causing discomfort in the relationship. Because I think I've always imagined, or at least I've gotten that kind of feedback from clients that when I try to think, imagine that I want to set a boundary, it means that I'm going to hurt somebody. Because it's that drastic for people that that means that I'm going to say something that is not okay. Because I'm also thinking that maybe because whenever they've made boundaries, it's come at a stage where it's already too much. And that is why it's communicated in that not okay manner. But
Yeah.
if it was to happen that, like you mentioned earlier, that you sense that discomfort and you are seeing that this line is not making me happy, and then you can communicate, then you're coming from a very okay space. So I see what you're saying. I have further thought that I know that for a matter, maybe I think I've experienced this, that I've tried to set boundaries with some people in my life, and I've always imagined that this person doesn't understand it, or not imagine, actually I've experienced that this person doesn't understand it, and they continue to push back on that. uh, so I'll give an example. So for example, I've told somebody that I am not okay if you call me at 10 o'clock and expect me to show up for you. uh, but this person, and like maybe for a while it will stop, and then again after a while they'll call me at 10 o'clock, and obviously my phone is on silent and all of that, but it's it's still something that causes me concern, because at 10 o'clock, like after a time, if somebody's calling, I feel that it's urgent and it requires attention, so it causes me a little worry. So I'm wondering that is it possible that people will continue to break boundaries even after you set it?
So going a little bit backward, how relationships are formed. Yeah. So we have a particular combination of boundaries that we carry along with us. Yeah.
Hmm.
So if we have an open boundary that, oh, I
Hmm.
am available for you whenever you want. Yeah.
Hmm.
Then we would have invited people to our life who would want to contact you whenever they
Hmm.
want. Right.
Hmm.
So that is,
Hmm.
so these boundaries also become a basis of formation of relationship. It's like an unsaid
Ah,
contract.
interesting. Okay. Hmm.
Yeah. Now the thing is, later when you discover that this boundary is not okay for you,
Hmm.
when you set a new boundary, we need to understand that for the other person, it is a change in the contract of the relationship. Yeah.
Is it okay to use another word instead of contract? I'm wondering
Yeah.
if we can. Uh,
Agreement.
agreement. Ah, okay. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Can you repeat
So,
that? I really like what you said. So when, or maybe I'll just repeat it, because the way I understood it is that when you have whatever boundaries you are, like, let's say you are built with, that's your basis of relationship or relating to others. Because, and the example you said that, okay, if I have an open boundary that anybody can come and contact me, which may come off as approachable and always available for everybody, uh, then that is the way of relating. But let's say that I grow up and I have more responsibility, different kind of a life. I view life differently. Some growth has happened. And I noticed that I really like my peace. And I'm not okay with somebody encroaching it. So I am then making a new set of boundaries with everybody, and maybe, like, let's say, telling people that, okay, I would like it if we contact in this and this hour. And you're saying what? Please go on. From that point, I want to help more. Yeah.
So when a relationship is formed, uh, it starts with testing each other's boundaries.
Hmm.
Can I come into your boundary? Can you come into my boundary? And if there is a consent, and this consent
Hmm.
happens very unconsciously, it's not very consciously discussed, negotiated. For example, for someone who wants someone to depend on,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, and the other person is very dependable, defines themselves as very dependable. So a
Hmm.
dependent person and a dependable person forms a relationship, and that becomes the basis or the contract or the terms or the agreement of the relationship. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this agreement is at a very unconscious level. It's not like a consciously spoken about thing.
Hmm.
Now, when one of them, may say the dependable person, is
Hmm.
changing their way of living,
Hmm.
yeah, want to engage only when absolutely required, yeah,
Hmm.
or critically required at certain point. Like you said that earlier you were available any 24 by 7. Now,
Hmm.
after 10, you are available only for most important things. Yeah. So
Hmm.
your
Hmm.
boundary is changing,
Hmm.
which means the initial agreement of the relationship is changing. So
Hmm.
for the other person, it's like a setback or a shock or a, oh, what
Hmm.
happened? This is not what we agreed upon. That is the reaction they will have.
Yeah. Hmm. Interesting. So I see that I have experienced that it continued happening for a while, and I continued saying that, okay, until it's not important, we'll talk about, like, at XYZ hour. I noticed that that changed, but that also meant that the nature of relationship changed a little bit. It was not the same, but it changed with that boundary, and that felt a little bad. But at the same time, I think it meant that my boundary was taken care of. So that was almost like a trade-off that I was okay with. But I'm imagining that when new boundaries are being made, there is some loss also that is experienced, which is why we don't end up making the new boundaries, is what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah. So when boundaries change, you cannot relate in the previous way. You need to find a
Mm,
new way to relate. And that may have a different kind of closeness or different kinds of interaction. You will not be
mm,
nourished by the mutual dependence. You may be nourished by something else, maybe reciprocation or,
mm.
meeting each other at the same level or some
Yeah.
other. So you were asking this question about what happens when someone doesn't respond to your boundary setting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
So given that boundary is something that determines the formation of the relationship,
mm,
there will naturally be resistance. So when you change the
mm,
boundary, unless the other person is completely aligned and is growing along with you, there will be resistance. Yeah. Now we need to decide what do we do with that resistance? As in, do we further discuss why this is important for me and whether they are willing to see that,
mm,
or are we willing to relate in the old way? So, for example, you said that if you told a person that you do not want to be called after 10 p.m. unless it is
mm.
absolutely necessary, right? And
Yeah.
if this person calls for something not that critical,
Mm,
and
mm.
for you, you are a person who considers that if someone calls, you will go and attend to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for you, it would be critical. Yeah.
Mm.
If a person calls, but it may end up not being a critical subject.
Correct.
So even after setting the boundary, if this is continuing to happen, then there are multiple options you may need to choose from.
Mm.
One of the option is continue with the relationship with the old boundary. Yeah,
Hmm.
there's one
Hmm.
option. The other option is further invite conversation
Hmm.
to say that why this is not acceptable for you.
Hmm.
Yeah. The other option is you may ignore such boundary violations, as in you may say that I'm not going to pick up this person's call after 10 p.m. So as a result,
Ah,
you may sometimes lose some critical, uh,
communication too.
yeah,
Hmm.
critical if they are contacting for some critical reasons. Yeah, but then there is a discomfort that you need to tolerate and some uh, setback that they will need to face because it is like crying wolf, right?
Yeah, that's what was coming to my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other option is if there is continuous disregard for your boundary being set, then you need to make a call about the relationship itself. Would you want to still continue in this relationship given that the other person is not capable of keeping a particular boundary? So you may have to redefine the relationship. I'm either going to change the distance in the relationship or whether this relationship is feasible at all. So you need to see
Yeah.
from these different options what option is
Which,
workable in this context.
hmm. And I mean, I'm also thinking that does it also depend on the level of intimacy that you have with in this relationship? That because let's say that I see a lot of these kind of issues between parents and children, where these kind of boundaries are tested, questioned, and let's say the child has decided to make a different new set of boundaries and has communicated over and over again and understands that it's maybe difficult for the parent to hold those new boundaries or respect the new boundaries. But I'm imagining that because in this society, the idea of you have to be with your parents is so um almost, I don't know what is the word for it, but it's so big that there's somewhat of a pressure to like cut your boundaries and accommodate for the parent because they are old, they will not understand. Like this is also a thing that maybe we can talk about that this whole aspect of that when people are old, you have to accommodate for them not respecting you. And in this area of boundary, I see it as very important because in boundary, it requires two people to respect this set line. But again, in Indian society, it's often said that you have to respect the elders, but might not be true the other way around. Uh, so, what do you do in a situation like that?
So my opinion is that respect is not dependent on age.
Hmm.
Yeah, respect
Hmm.
is part of any reciprocal relationship. Yeah, when it comes to parents and let's say adult children here. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
speaking parents
Yeah.
and their adult children. Yeah, there's this cultural norm that you don't antagonize the parent or you do what they say. Now the thing is, it is possible that to align to the cultural norms, we may end up doing that, but internally we are not at comfort with it, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is that, like we discussed earlier, externally we are showing that we are fine, internally we are not fine. So when that happens, what happens is we will build resentment and collect it. Yeah. And this
Hmm.
resentment builds up. So in this example you gave between parent and adult children, in the adult children, that resentment will collect even if externally they are complying. And it's just a
Yeah.
matter of time till it builds to a level where it's not tolerable and then starts to affect the relationship.
Hmm. So there is again this when you're saying that, right, that it builds or it is like collected the resentment. I'm thinking that everybody has like almost like a bottle of how much they can take. Like there's a size that we can take, which is like okay for you to comply, and disregard what your needs are or what your desires are. And there is a space, like there's a point of completion, and after that, it's very difficult to then be in a regulated space and make those changes. So we may want to, again, you shared some few points on how do you gauge the relationship, knowing that a person is not able to respect it. So those 4 points may apply here as well.
So it is very difficult to cut off from parents, right?
Yeah.
So you started by asking this question about what happens in intimate relationship. I would like to rephrase that.
Hmm.
Your question is about what happens in relationship with intense attachment. Yeah, these are
How is
relationships
that different?
because when we say intimacy, we need to define what intimacy means. Yeah,
Okay. Hmm.
intimacy actually for me means that ability to connect with emotional vulnerability. Yeah,
Hmm.
and there is mutual respect, which is part of an authentically intimate relationship, right?
Understood.
So
Hmm.
here we are talking about attachment, as in there are certain
Hmm.
relationships like parent, child, or spousal relationship, or sibling relationship,
Siblings.
yeah,
Hmm.
or closest friends where attachment is very high.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when
Hmm.
attachment is very high, the stake of the relationship is also very high. Yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
that
Hmm.
means that for both individual, the stake of losing the relationship is quite high.
Yeah.
So in such cases, all the four options I told may not apply or may
Hmm.
not be easy to implement. You may not be able to say that, okay, uh, to the parent that, okay, you violated my boundaries 3 times, now I'm cutting off from you.
Yeah.
That
True.
may not be
Hmm.
possible.
Yeah.
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 So
Hmm.
we would need to then see what is workable. So yes, so whatever be the relationship, the feasibility of realigning a boundary also depends on how open is the other person for change. Yeah. Sometimes the other person may not be open for change. For
Yeah.
example, if a parent and they're aged and they are not working on themselves,
Hmm.
it may be much more difficult for them to change the boundary. Then you
Yeah.
may have to decide what is comfortable for you. So what amount of boundary violation is comfortable for you, and you may have to set it multiple times.
Hmm.
You may have to re-emphasize multiple times, say no multiple times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Or
Sometimes,
I'm also thinking that that could be the new reality, that you are saying no. It may not never register with them, but you will have to continue saying no because it's something that you are not okay with. That's all.
yeah. So it's not only about saying no. Like what
Hmm.
I said earlier, that
Hmm.
we need to be convinced that this boundary is better for the relationship and maybe initiate
Hmm.
a discussion with the other person. Why is it better?
Why is it better?
Yeah,
Hmm.
because it's about other person also being convinced that this is now good
Okay.
for the relationship. For example, if a parent is so used to controlling their adult child, telling them
Yeah.
what to do, yeah, and the child may be 40 years old, yeah, but they may say that, okay, tell me whenever you go out, I
Okay.
want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
Now, it's important to say that I understand that you're coming from a place of concern.
Hmm.
At the same time, you need to trust me that I'm old enough to decide my safety. So you need not be concerned. So if you just trust me that I can take care of myself, I can also be relaxed. You can also be relaxed. Yeah.
Hmm.
So it is about placing this invitation multiple times.
Hmm.
And it may be
Yeah, because
easier.
when the way you're saying it, it might not just be like in one conversation, the parent is like, okay, no worries. It does sound, because it brings in a lot of discomfort for both the parties, I'm imagining. So it is important to, it's almost like the adult has to say that I'm an adult. It's okay. You can relax. So yeah, you were saying something, sorry.
Yeah. What I was saying was, on one side, it is easier to do that in high attachment relationship because you want that relationship to be there. So
Yeah.
you may have no other choice but to repeat it multiple times,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So you may have to repeat, say, 100 times, and then you will see a little bit of change. Yeah. And that
Yeah.
itself may be a win, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
The other side of it is in high attachment relationship, our trigger also is can be very high.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when we are trying to be controlled, we are like, rage comes from within. Why
Yeah.
are you trying to control me?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's learning to regulate that impact also before we go and communicate about new
Communicate
boundaries.
the boundary. Hmm. Yeah, because then I'm also thinking that when you're communicating a boundary, it should come from a place that it's not uncomfortable. The word you used was conviction, that you have conviction that this is important to you. But if you are communicating that in rage, then you may miss out on the significance of this conviction and it will just be very harsh on the other person. So there's a lot of discount that I'm imagining would happen in that kind of a scenario where you're like raged. So yeah, thanks. Thanks, Joy. Hmm.